Okay, guys, let's begin with the final part, that is part 3. We'll see directly go to Heidegger. Martin Heidegger believed humanism to be a metaphysical philosophy in that it ascribes to humanity a universal essence, privileging it above all other forms of existence. For Heidegger, humanism takes consciousness as the paradigm. For Heidegger, humanism takes consciousness as the paradigm of philosophy, leading it to a subjectivism and idealism that must be avoided. Heidegger, like Hegel before him, rejected the Kantian notion of autonomy, claiming humans to be social and historical beings. Heidegger also rejected Kant's notion of a constituting consciousness that constructs the world around it. In spite of this, Heidegger was claimed as a forebearer to the ostensibly humanist movement of existentialism, leading him to distance himself from humanism in his 1947 letter on humanism. এটাকে একটু সিম্পলিফাই করে পড়বো আমরা. Break down this passage, simplify it, all in short. Okay. So Martin Heidegger believed that humanism is a metaphysical philosophy because it assumes metaphysical, যেটা আদতে নেই, invisible, assumes a fixed universal human essence and places humans above all other forms of existence. তাই জন্য এটা হচ্ছে metaphysical. Why Heidegger rejected humanism makes human consciousness the center of philosophy. This leads to subjectivism, everything depending on humans, যে কিভাবে কিছু জিনিস চলবে, সব জিনিস চলবে, and idealism, ideas matter more, আইডিয়াটা কি বলছে, mattering more than what the reality is. Heidegger thought this approach was mistaken and limiting, that is subjectivism, আর একটা হচ্ছে idealism. Heidegger versus Kant, like Heidegger rejected Kant's idea of autonomous individuals. He argued that humans are social, historical, shaped by context, not self-contained. He also rejected Kant's idea that consciousness creates or constructs the world. He also rejected Kant's idea that consciousness creates or constructs the world. বলছে হতেই পারে না, কারণ consciousness তো subjective, consciousness তো ideal, ঠিক আছে, এবং তোমরা ওটাকে অ্যাজ এ অটোনমাস হিসেবে ট্রিট করছো, সেটা তো হতে পারে না. হিউম্যানস আর সোশ্যাল, হিস্টোরিক্যাল, শেপ বাই কনটেক্সট, নট সেলফ কন্টেইনড. He also rejects Kant's idea that consciousness creates or constructs the world. Later on humanism, Heidegger was wrongly associated with existentialist humanism. To correct this, he clearly distanced himself from humanism. He did this in 1947 essay Letter on Humanism. What is existentialist humanism in simple and short? Humanism is the idea that humans have no fixed nature, but they create meaning and values through their choices and actions. So responsibility lies entirely with human beings themselves. Again, okay, একটা খুব সাবজেক্টিভ জিনিসের মালিক ঘোষণা করে দেওয়া হয়েছিল, যেটাও নয়. এক্সিস্টেনশিয়ালিস্ট হিউম্যানিজম কি? এক্সিস্টেনশিয়ালিস্ট হিউম্যান বলছে যে হ্যাঁ, হিউম্যানদের মধ্যে কোনো ফিক্সড নেচার নেই, কিন্তু তারা মানে ক্রিয়েট করে অ্যান্ড ভ্যালিউ ক্রিয়েট করে নিজেদের চয়েস অ্যান্ড অ্যাকশন দিয়ে. মানে নিজেদের চয়েস অ্যান্ড অ্যাকশন দিয়ে তুমি মানে ভ্যালু তৈরি করতে পারো, তেমনটা তো নয়. তোমার চয়েস খালি তোমার নয়, তোমার চয়েস সোশ্যাল, তোমার চয়েস হিস্টোরিক্যাল. ইট ইজ বাই দ্য কনটেক্সট, নট সেলফ কন্টেইনড. So we understood Heidegger. Martin Heidegger believed humanism to be a metaphysical philosophy in that it ascribes to humanity a universal essence, privileging it above all other forms of existence. For Heidegger, humanism takes consciousness as the paradigm of philosophy. Leading it to a subjectivism and idealism that must be avoided. Heidegger, like Hegel before him, rejected the Kantian notion of autonomy, claiming humans to be social and historical beings. Heidegger also rejected Kant's notion of constituting consciousness that constructs the world around it, যে নিজের চয়েস দিয়ে তৈরি করছে. ঠিক আছে. Kant's notion of consciousness, and how is Heidegger going against it in simple and short? Kant's idea of consciousness hoche Kant believed that the human mind actively organizes and shapes the world. Of course, we experience reality appears to us through consciousness. Heidegger said humans do not think first and then meet the world. We are already in the world, shaped by history, society, and context, not creators of the world through consciousness. Acha, now we got it. Of constituting consciousness that constructs the world around it. Okay. Next, we'll move to Althusser. Acha. Now we'll come to Louis Althusser. Simplified, Louis Althusser introduced the term anti-humanism. Acha. He used it against Marxist humanists whom he saw as revisionist. That is, Marx ke distort jara hocche আজকালকার মার্কসিস্ট বা মার্কসিস্ট হিউম্যানিস্ট যারা ঠিক আছে ও মার্কসিজমকে কিছু বলেনি মার্কসিস্ট হিউম্যানিস্টদের what Althusser opposed he strongly rejected the philosophy of the subject he denied that individuals are the starting point of meaning or action এই যে হিউম্যানিজম যে বলছিল যে পুরো ফিলসফিটাই ডিপেন্ড করছে অন দ্য সাবজেক্ট ও সেটাকে নেগেট করেছে অ্যান্ড সেকেন্ডলি এই যে হিউম্যানিস্টরা বলছে দ্যাট ইন্ডিভিজুয়ালস আর দ্য স্টার্টিং পয়েন্ট অফ মিনিং অর ক্রিয়েশন ও সেটাও রিজেক্ট করছে social relations come first social relations are more important than individual consciousness a person's beliefs desires preferences judgments are produced by social practices in short society shapes individuals not the other way around individual shape করে কিন্তু আলথুজার বলছে করে না লুইস আলথুজার subjecthood is constructed not natural people think they are free independent subjects Althusser says this belief is not natural or innate individuals are made into subjects of ideology subjects by ideology বলে হ্যাঁ তুমি ফ্রি তুমি ইকুয়াল তুমি ফ্রি তুমি ইকুয়াল তাই জন্য তুমি ভাবছো যে তুমি সব তৈরি করছো অ্যাকচুয়ালি আদতে কিন্তু সেটা নয় এই চিন্তা ভাবনাটা ন্যাচারালও না ইনেটও না ইন্ডিভিজুয়ালস আর মেড ইনটু সাবজেক্ট ওই সাবজেক্ট পজিশনে তাকে উঠানো হচ্ছে বাই আইডিওলজি ঠিক আছে so we'll quickly revise Louis Althusser coined the term anti-humanism. It was directed against Marxist humanism, which he considered a revisionist movement. It meant a radical opposition to the philosophy of the subject. Althusser considered social relations to have primacy over individual consciousness. For Althusser, the beliefs, desires, and preferences and judgments of the human individual are the product of the social practices, of course. That is to say, society makes the individual in its own image. True. The human individual's belief that he is a subject responsible for his own actions is not innate. Rather, he is constituted as a subject by society and its ideologies. ওর হাতে কিছুই নেই পুরোটাই সোসাইটির হাতে philosophy of the subject. What is the philosophy of the subject? Write in short and simple. Philosophy of the subject is the idea that the individual human being is a free, conscious, rational center of thought and action who understands the world and make choices independently. Okay, so it's basically that philosophy that that humans are in the moral center of the world and their lives, their respective lives are created by their independent choices and actions. Whereas it's not that, according to all these people we are talking about, especially Althusser, who is saying that it is the society which plans an individual's life based on his desires, his social beliefs, his religious beliefs, his practices. So it's not the other way around. They can't make independent decision because there is nothing called independence. Now we'll come to Foucault and Derrida. Okay. Foucault and Derrida simplified. A common idea linked to them is the decentered subject, like literally Michel Foucault and Derrida, Jean-Jacques Derrida said it. This means the human is no longer the center and human agency, full control over actions is weakened. Foucault Derrida এটাই বলছে Foucault Derrida কি বলছে this means that the human is no longer the center and human agency is weakened. Jacques Derrida argued that language is unstable. এটা আমি কি করে বলবো, studied it so passionately. Derrida argued that language is unstable and ambiguous. Because of this, intentions can never be fully known. Language itself shapes and controls how we think and act. Very true. So, meaning does not come from the human mind alone, language governs it. Derrida argued that language itself is unstable and ambiguous. Derrida argued that language is unstable and ambiguous. Because of this, intentions can never be fully known. Language itself shapes and controls how we think and act. So, meaning does not come from the human mind alone, language governs it. Michel Foucault. In the order of things, Foucault argued that every historical period has a specific system of knowledge called an episteme. He called the modern period the age of man, but he believed this age would eventually end. Foucault supported a future where thought moves beyond humans as the main object of knowledge. Humans' main object of knowledge, no. Thought is the main object of knowledge. So, Michel Foucault, in order of things, Foucault argued that every historical period has a specific system of knowledge called an episteme, যে এইটা অনুযায়ী কাজ হবে, ঠিক আছে. He called the modern period age of man, যেখানে স্পেসিফিক সিস্টেম অফ নলেজটা ম্যান থেকে আসছে, ঠিক আছে. বাট হি বিলিভ দ্যাট দিস এজ উড ইভেনচুয়ালি এন্ড, যেখানে মানুষ নিজেকে সর্বোপরি ভাবা বন্ধ করে দেবে. Foucault supported a future where thought moves beyond humans as the main object of knowledge. A common neologism for this is the decentered subject, which implies the absence of human agency. For instance, Jacques Derrida argued that the fundamentally ambiguous nature of language makes intentions unknowable and leaves language to structure and govern thoughts and actions. It is language which is governing. Michel Foucault, in the order of things, argued that there is a basic of knowledge in every epoch, what he calls episteme. He argued that this contemporary time is the age of man, and he envisioned and supported a time where thought finally moves beyond the human as the object of inquiry. As the object of inquiry. No, what is the meaning of the words object of inquiry? Study how language works, because it is ultimately language which is doing it. Now we'll come to feminist philosophers. Feminist thinkers like Luce Irigaray okay. So, feminist thinkers like Luce Irigaray pointed out something very basic. The so called universal man of humanism is not neutral. He's literally a man, and not just any man. He is a male, white, European, conventionally handsome, and able bodied. So, when humanism says man represents all humanity, feminists ask, really, who exactly is being represented here? The Leonardo da Vinci joke. Okay, the ideal image of man, think Renaissance art like Leonardo da Vinci, is treated as universal, but feminists point out we know nothing about humanity from this image. We speculate more about Leonardo da Vinci himself than real humans. So, this ideal man does not represent most people at all. Feminist criticism goes deeper. Feminists like Nancy Hartsock and Bell Hooks argued that humanist universalism is problematic on three levels. Number one, epistemological. It pretends one experience, যে সবার একই experience হবে, everyone's experience. Ethical. It excludes women, non-white and disabled bodies, একদম. And political. It supports patriarchy and white dominance while calling it neutral. খুব simple. Feminists like Nancy Hartsock and Bell Hooks argued that humanist universalism is problematic on three levels. Number one is epistemological knowledge. It pretends one experience is equal to everyone's experience. In Leonardo da Vinci, it's a picture of all humanity. Why don't I? Ethical values, it excludes women, non-white, and differently abled bodies. Number three, political, it supports patriarchy and white dominance while calling it neutral. So, feminists like Luz Irigaray, 1985, pointed out that the allegedly abstract ideal of man as a symbol of classical humanity is very much a male of the species. It is a he. Moreover, he is white, European, conventionally handsome, and able bodied. Of his sexuality, nothing much can be guessed. Though plenty of speculation surrounds that of its painter Leonardo da Vinci. What this ideal model may have in common with the statistical average of most members of the species and the civilization he is supposed to represent is a very good question indeed. মানে ওকে দেখে বাকিদের ব্যাপারে আমরা কি শিখছি? Feminist critics of patriarchal posturing through abstract masculinity and triumphant whiteness argued. Feminist critics of patriarchal posturing through abstract masculinity and triumphant whiteness argued that this humanist universalism is objectionable not only on epistemological but also on ethical and political grounds. So we understood the feminist part as well. Anti-colonial thinkers. Post-colonial thinkers explicitly questioned the relevance of the humanistic ideal in view of the obvious contradictions imposed by its Eurocentric assumptions, but at the same time, they did not entirely cast it aside. Post-colonial thinkers explicitly questioned the relevance of the humanistic ideal in view of the obvious contradictions imposed by its European assumptions. Acha. Post-colonial critique of humanism. Post-colonial thinkers questioned the relevance of humanism because it was built on Eurocentric assumptions that contradicted the realities of colonial violence. তো তুমি free and equal, কিন্তু তুমি যাদেরকে পরাধীনে নিচ্ছ তারা free and equal না. However, they did not reject humanism completely, holding Europe accountable but not rejecting humanism. Post-colonial thinkers blamed Europeans, not humanism itself. They exposed how humanism was used and abused to justify colonial domination, violence, and cultural suppression. They did this by closely examining colonial history. This line, they did this by closely examining colonial history. Who is this they? Are they the post-colonial thinkers? To justify domination, violence, and exploitation. Right. Yet, they still upheld the basic ideals of humanism such as dignity and freedom. সবাই আর dignity আছে এবং সবাই free. Post-colonial thinkers blame Europeans, not humanism itself. They exposed how humanism was used and abused to justify colonial domination, violence, cultural suppression. They did this by closely examining colonial history. They did this by closely examining colonial history. Yet, they still upheld the basic ideals of humanism such as dignity and freedom. Frantz Fanon's position, very important. Frantz Fanon argued that humanism was betrayed by Europeans, it must be rescued from its European misuse. In the preface to The Wretched of the Earth, Jean Paul Sartre writes that colonized voices speak of humanism, but they push it towards posthumanism. They expose Europe's inhumanity and move beyond the selfish self. যার জন্য তোমরা এত violence করছো, তাই না? In the preface to The Wretched of the Earth, Jean Paul Sartre writes that colonized voices speak of humanism, but they push it more towards posthumanism. They expose Europe's inhumanity and move beyond the selfish self. Where can humanism go next? Post colonial thought argues if humanism has a future, it must come from outside the Western world, it must overcome Eurocentrism, right? Challenging scientific rationality, by extension, the claim that Western scientific rationality is universal is challenged. This challenge is made on epistemological ground. How knowledge is formed? It is not formed in Europe. I mean, not only formed in Europe. Political grounds, who has the power, and definitely this power should not reside with a white man. This critique is supported by thinkers like Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak and Edward Said. তো এই পার্টটা আমরা আরেকবার পড়ব। Post colonial thinkers explicitly questioned the relevance of the humanistic ideal in view of the obvious contradictions imposed by its Eurocentric assumptions, but at the same time, they did not entirely cast it aside. They held the European accountable for the uses and abuses of this ideal by looking at colonial history and the violent domination of other cultures, but still upheld its basic premises. Franz Fanon, for instance, wanted to rescue humanism from its European perpetuators, arguing that we have betrayed and misused the humanist ideal. As Sartre put it in his preface to Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, the yellow and black voices still spoke of our humanism, but only to post-humanism. Life beyond the self reproach us with our inhumanity. Life beyond the self reproach us with our inhumanity. যেখানে আমরা ভেবে নিচ্ছি যে self is only the center. The humanity আমাদের এসে reproach করছে, life আমাদের এসে reproach করছে. Post-colonial thought asserts that if humanism has a future at all, it has to come from outside the Western world and pass the limitations of Eurocentrism. By extension, the claim to universality by scientific rationality is challenged on both epistemological and political grounds. যেটাকে তোমরা ওয়েস্টার্ন rationality হিসেবে বলছো, এটা ওয়েস্টার্ন rationality, এবং সেটা epistemologically and political grounds এ নিউট্রাল ম্যাম, নাল অ্যান্ড ভয়েড। সাইবর্গ ম্যানিফেস্টো তো আমরা পড়েছি, আরেকবার পড়ে নেব। Acha, a cyborg manifesto. Donna Haraway wrote a cyborg manifesto which was published in 2006, widely circulated edition. What is a cyborg? Haraway describes cyborg as a hybrid of machine and organism, both real social reality and imaginary fiction. Hybrid of machine. Cyborg a hybrid of machine and organism, part real, part imaginary. Part human, part machine. Origin of the cyborg idea. The term cyborg comes from Manfred Klein's, who used it in his 1960s article Cyborgs in Space. His idea, Manfred Klein's key idea, humans should modify their bodies so they can travel, so they can survive space travel. Haraway's key idea, which is very important, that we are already cyborg because we constantly depend on technology, medicine, machines, digital systems. So the boundary between human and machine is already broken. রাইট সো আলাদা করে তো মানে সাইবর্গ হওয়ার কোনো দরকার নেই, যেমন ম্যানফ্রেড ক্লাইন্স বলছে, হ্যারোভে বলছে দ্যাট উই আর অলরেডি সাইবর্গস because we constantly depend on technology, medicine, machines, digital systems. So the boundary between human and machine is already broken. Cyborg and feminism. In her 1985 essay, Haraway argues that cybernetics and technology ক্যান হেল্প চ্যালেঞ্জ জেন্ডার ইনইকুয়ালিটিস। কীভাবে? কারণ সাইবর্গ ওই ওল্ড বাইনারিগুলো ভেঙে ফেলছে, ম্যান ভার্সেস মেল ভার্সেস ফিমেল, হিউম্যান ভার্সেস মেশিন, ন্যাচারাল ভার্সেস আর্টিফিশিয়াল। তো জেন্ডার ইনইকুয়ালিটিসও ভেঙে ফেলবে। দিস হেল্পস আস ইমাজিন আ মোর ইকুয়াল নন পেট্রিয়ার্কাল ওয়ার্ল্ড। It's fun, right? In a robotic world, who would care if you're a man or a female? Who would care of that? So, in a 1985 essay, Haraway argues that cybernetics and technology can help challenge gender inequalities. The cyborg breaks old binaries like male female, machine human, natural artificial. This helps us imagine a more equal and non patriarchal world. So, a cyborg manifesto, science, technology, and socialist feminism in the late 20th century by Donna Haraway was published in 2006. What is a cyborg? A cyborg is a cybernetic organism, a hybrid of machine, part human, part machine. बोललाम तो part machine and organism, a creature of social reality as well as a creature of fiction. Machine. Creature of social reality as well as a creature of fiction. Origin of the concept of the cyborg. The cyborg as a concept is associated with scientist, innovator, and musician Manfred Kleins, who deployed it in his 1960s article Cyborgs and Space, where he argued for altering the human body to make it suitable for space travel. For Haraway, we are already cyborgs. Haraway posits that the advent of cybernetics might help in the construction of a world capable of challenging gender inequalities, a proposal she made in her 1985 essay titled A Cyborg Manifesto. This is going to be a long video because we are almost done. Zoo and bios. Okay, Rosie Braidotti simplified. Rosie Braidotti defines life as zoo. এবার zoo কি? Do you say it's zoo or do you say it's zoe? Let me just hear, হ্যাঁ একটু শুনি আমরা।
Here is a simple short all points included, no overload. Rosie Braidotti simplified. Rosie Braidotti defines life as Zoe. What is Zoe? Zoe means life force or generative power. It includes all living beings, not just humans. Any entity that can grow, affect, or reproduce has Zoe. Zoe versus bios, very important. Braidotti says, open quote, life is half Zoe and half bios, close quote. Zoe equals animal, non-human, biological life. Bios equals human life, shaped by language, politics, culture, social meanings. So human life is never purely natural, it is always interpreted and spoken about. What does non-human mean here? Non-human does not mean outside humanity. It means the collapse of the idea that humans are pure, separate, superior. Humans are entangled with other forms of life. An important ethical point. Zoe cannot speak for itself. We understand non-human life through human discourse. This creates a power imbalance. Human equals dominant, non-human equals marginalized or oppressed. So when we speak for non-human life, we must acknowledge our bias, accept that our perspective is subjective, be ethically responsible toward difference. One line takeaway, exam ready, open quote, Braidotti defines life as Zoe, shared by all living beings, and argues that human life, bios, is discursively constructed, requiring ethical responsibility when humans speak for non-human difference. If you want next, Zoe versus bios in a memory table.
So we understood, right? It's a really fun concept. We have some new words to play around with. A few words which I'm going to use a lot in my daily life. One will definitely be cyborg by Donna. No, by Manfred Kleins, later used and made famous by Donna Haraway. The another idea is defines life as Zoe. That's such a cute name, Zoe. As said by Rosie Braidotti, right? Rosibraidoti. What is Zoe? Zoe means life power or generative power, right? It includes all living beings, not just humans. Any entity that can grow, affect, or reproduce has Zoe inside them. So the life power or generative force. Zoe versus bios, which is very important. Braidotti says life is half Zoe and half bios. Zoe is animal, non-human, biological life, right? Like a plant, like an animal, anything. Bios হচ্ছে human life which is shaped by human life is shaped by a lot of stuff like right, the language you're speaking, the politics you do, culture, your social meanings. So human life is never purely Zoe. Plant life is, according to them. So human life is never purely natural. It is always interpreted and spoken about. What does non-human mean here? Non-human does not mean outside humanity. It means the collapse of the idea that humans are pure, separate, superior. Humans are entangled with other forms of life. I will like to ask a question, that is, Zoe means life force or generative power, right? So where is the word non-human coming from? And then explain whatever you have written under that. Like non-human does not mean outside humanity. It means the collapse of the idea. From where are these coming from? Important question. Right. So, yes, Zoe is the life force generative power. It comes from the Greek philosophy where Zoe is raw biological life, life as such. And bios, a particular form of this Zoe. ঠিক আছে, social, political, narrated life, যেটা আমাদের human life. So, particular form of Zoe is bios. So far, nothing about non-human yet. So, where does non-human come from? This is the key move Rosie Braidotti makes. She is working in posthumanism, which tries to break human exceptionalism, stop treating humans as separate, pure, or superior. So she asks, if Zoe is life itself and not just human life, then what happens to the boundary between humans and non-humans? The boundary collapses. যে হিউম্যানিজম যে মানুষকে এত উপরে করলো, তো তাহলে বাউন্ডারিটার কি হলো বিটুইন হিউম্যানস অ্যান্ড নন হিউম্যান? Non-human does not mean outside humanity. This is where people get confused. Braidotti is not saying non-humans jara তারা aliens বা তারা monsters বা something unrelated. Instead she means non-human is whatever disrupts the idea that the human is pure separate central. সেই সব কিছু যেগুলো চোখে আঙ্গুল দিয়ে দেখিয়ে দিচ্ছে যে মানুষ পিওর নয়, মানুষ সেপারেট নয়, মানুষ সেন্ট্রাল নয়, সেই সবগুলোই নন হিউম্যান. সো নন হিউম্যান ইনক্লুডস অ্যানিমালস, প্লান্টস, ইকোসিস্টেমস, মাইক্রোবস, টেকনোলজি, material forces, and crucially humans are already entangled with all of these. So non-human is inside the definition of human, not outside it. Why does she say collapse of purity? Human, traditional humanism ki bole humans rational, humans separate from animals, humans superior to nature. Braidotti says human bodies are biological, human survival depends on animals, food, environment, technology, তাই না? Human identity is relational, তুমি কে কোন রিলেশন এক্সিস্ট করতে হচ্ছে. So the idea of a pure human essence collapses. That is where the phrase comes from. So Zoe to non-human to ethics. Here's the logical change. Zoe হচ্ছে life as a shared force across all beings. Therefore humans are not unique holders of life. Animalদের ভেতরে আছে, প্লান্টদের ভেতরেও আছে. Therefore the human non-human boundary is unstable. Therefore non-human is part of how humans exist. তাছাড়া humans exist করতে পারছে না. Therefore humans must speak ethically when talking about human life. Non-human life. I'm so sorry. আচ্ছা, আরেকবার এটা রিভাইজ করে নেব. So what does non-human mean here? Non-human does not mean outside humanity. It means the collapse of the idea that humans are pure, separate, central, superior. Humans are entangled with other forms of life. An important ethical point, Zoe cannot speak for itself. We understand non-human life through human discourse. মানুষরা যেভাবে ডিসক্রাইব করছে সেভাবে. এই গাছটার কি কি সো সরি, ছোটবেলা আমরা কি যেন করতাম, গাছটার নিজের কথা, রাইট? করতাম তো, জানতে পারছি থ্রু ওয়াট, একটা মানুষ লিখছে বলে জানতে পারছি, হিউম্যান ডিসকোর্স থেকে জানতে পারছি. দিস ক্রিয়েটস আ পাওয়ার ইমব্যালেন্স. হিউম্যান হয়ে যায় ডমিনেন্ট আর নন হিউম্যান মার্জিনালাইজড বা অপ্রেসড. সো ওয়েন উই স্পিক ফর নন হিউম্যান লাইফ উই মাস্ট অ্যাকনলেজ আওয়ার বায়াস, যে হ্যাঁ আমরা বায়াসড হয়েই লিখছি, এক্সেপ্ট দ্যাট আমরা যেটা লিখছি সেটা সাবজেক্টিভ, এটাই সত্যি এরম নয়, and be ethically responsible toward our difference. খুব সুন্দর একটা idea by Rosie Braidotti. So Rosie Braidotti defines life as Zoe, which describes any entity that has generative power. Life is half animal, half human. Zoe. Life is half human, half animal. Life is half animal. Life is half animal, non-human, Zoe, and half political and discursive. So life is half animal. Animal to আমরা আছি. Life is made out of that animal. Non-human আছে আমাদের ভেতর because we are generative, reproductive force in us. So Zoe, and half political and discursive because we are মানুষ. We are interpreting our life politically and through discourse. That is bios, right? Non-human does not mean outside the human, but the collapse of purity in defining the human as necessarily and irreducibly separate from anything else, তাই না? এবার নন হিউম্যান মানে এই যে নন হিউম্যান আমরা জয়ীকে দিলাম, নন হিউম্যান ইজ নট এনিথিং আউটসাইড হিউম্যানিটি, ইট ইজ জাস্ট দ্য কোলাপস অফ আ পিউরিটি ইন ডিফাইনিং দ্য হিউম্যান অ্যাজ নেসেসারিলি অ্যান্ড ইররিডিউসিবলি সেপারেট ফ্রম এনিথিং এলস. এই যে মানুষকে নেসেসারিলি অ্যান্ড মানে পিওর বলা হয়, সেপারেট বলা হয়, এই কোলাপসটা, ঠিক আছে? Bios is human life as always and already discursive. Bios is human life and as always bios is human life as always and already discursive. Discursive through আমরা বাচ্চি, জানছি, politics, language, culture. Zoe, that which has life but is other and thus can only be understood to live through our discourse and address to difference which must acknowledge its own flaws as subjective and coming from the dominant. যে মানতে হবে যে yes I am from the dominant জাতি and আমি তাই জন্য এই রুলটা দিচ্ছি, and accepting that I have my own flaws to a non-dominant, often marginalized or oppressed non-humans, of course. Now we'll come to breaking dualism. চলো গাইজ, আর 4টে স্লাইড and we are done, ঠিক আছে? पढ़ते पढ़ते कभी कभी डिस्ट्रैक्ट होना भी ज़रूरी है. अच्छा, okay. হ্যারোভে ব্রেকিং বাউন্ডারিজটাকে সিম্পলিফাই করছি. In a cyborg manifesto, Donna Haraway traces the history of human machine relations and explains how three major boundaries were broken, changing how we define what is natural and what is cultural. ঠিক আছে, কোনটা ন্যাচারাল, কোনটা নেচার থেকে এসছে, কোনটা কালচার থেকে এসছে. দ্য থ্রি ব্রোকেন বাউন্ডারিজ, কি কি ব্রোকেন বাউন্ডারিজ? নাম্বার ওয়ান হচ্ছে হিউম্যান ভার্সেস অ্যানিমাল, 19th century. Early belief humans are exceptional and superior. After On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, this boundary collapsed. Humans became part of evolution, যে আমরা বাদর থেকে এসেছি, not outside it. Result, human exceptionalism was rejected. Number two, human versus machine at Industrial Revolution. Machines entered every part of human life. Humans became dependent on machines. Machines extended human abilities, generally speed, strength, production. Result, machines became inseparable from human beings. Point three, nature versus culture. Internet versus software revolution. Silicon chips and software now exist everywhere. These machines are often invisible. It becomes unclear where the machine ends, where the human begins. Culture now intrudes into nature. Culture, which is technology, now intrudes into nature, which is human, changing it and mixing with it. Final result, core idea. Because of these changes, boundaries between human, animal, human, machine, and nature culture have become blurred and intangible. আলাদা বলে এখন আর কিছু নেই, হ্যাঁ না? So, in a cyborg manifesto, Haraway explores the history of the relationship between humans and machines, arguing that three boundaries were broken throughout human history, which have changed the definition of what is deemed cultural or otherwise natural. What are these three boundaries? Rejection of notions of human exceptionalism and superiority. The boundary between humans and animals was broken in the 19th century after the publishing of On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. Number two, the Industrial Revolution. As the Industrial Revolution arrived, all aspects of human life became mechanized. As human dependence on machines surged, machines became an inseparable part of what it is to be human, an extension of human capability. The Internet and Software Revolution. First came developments in silicon semiconductor chips that now pervade all of life's domains. As these machines are practically invisible, it is then difficult to decide where the machine ends and humans start. This machine that represents culture intruding over nature, intertwining with it and changing in the process. As a result, boundaries between culture and the natural become more and more intangible. Tangible কিছু না. আর চারটে গাইস, তারপর আমি আপনাদের ছেড়ে দেবো. পড়াটা খুব দরকার, লেখাপড়া করো, নিজেকে নলেজেবল করে তোলো, যাতে এই দুনিয়ায় কেউ কখনো তোমাকে ছোট নজরে না দেখতে পারে. জ্বলুক তোমার থেকে, ইনসিকিউর হোক নিজের মধ্যে, দ্যাট ইজ দেয়ার ফল্ট, দ্যাট ইজ নট ইয়োর ফল্ট, বাট তুমি নিজের স্ট্যান্ডিং এতটা স্ট্রং করো যে তুমি নিজেকে ডাউট না করো। তারা জ্বলছে জ্বলুক, নিশ্চয়ই তোমার মধ্যে এমন কিছু আছে জ্বলবার মতো, কিন্তু তার জন্য তুমি নিজেকে কখনো ছোট করবে না। অ্যান্ড পড়াশোনা ইজ দ্য মোক্ষম ওয়েপন ফর দ্যাট। ওকে, দ্য সাইবর্গ অ্যাজ আ পোস্ট হিউম্যান সাবজেক্ট সিম্পলিফাইড। আমি ওই জন্য বেশি এগুলো নিয়ে ভাবি না, জাস্ট পড়াশোনা করি and I know where my stand is. Touch wood, where is wood? Touch wood. Okay. Donna Haraway presents the cyborg as a modern cultural metaphor to explain the ambiguous condition of contemporary human. সাইবর্গ দিয়ে এক্সপ্লেন করবে, একটা মডার্ন কালচারাল মেটাফর হিসেবে ট্রিট করবে টু এক্সপ্লেন দি অ্যাম্বিগুয়াস কন্ডিশন অফ, মানে খুব খারাপ না খুব ভালো না, কন্ডিশন অফ মডার্ন হিউম্যান বিংস। ঠিক আছে, হোয়াট ডাজ দিস মিন? So today human bodies are open to technological innovations. কিভাবে? Prosthetics, medical technologies, drugs use করছে, implants লাগাচ্ছে। So humans are no longer purely natural নয়। ঠিক আছে? Next is role of science fiction, very important. The cyborg metaphor also draws from science fiction where technology fixes human limitations. Prosthesis or drugs don't just heal, they make characters stronger, faster, smarter, beyond normal human limits. This imagines humans as more than human. Role of fiction, science fiction খুব important. The cyborg metaphor also draws from science fiction where technology fixes human limitations. Prosthesis or drugs don't just heal, they make characters stronger, faster, smarter, beyond normal human limits. This imagines humans as more than human. Why Haraway uses cyborg? Haraway does not say technology is only good or bad. Instead, she says keeps the tension. Instead, she says technology keeps the tension between danger and possibility, shows how technological mediation can be creatively productive, politically meaningful. Technology can reshape power, identity, and politics, not just bodies. Power, identity, and politics, not just bodies. So Haraway does not say technology is only good or bad. Instead, she keeps the tension between danger and possibility, shows how technological mediation can be creatively productive, politically meaningful. Creatively productive, politically meaningful. Technology can reshape power, identity, and politics, not just bodies. Technology can reshape power, identity, politics, not just bodies. Give some fun real life example of the risky political possibilities due to technology mediating through body. খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট, দেখো সার্ভেলেন্স বডি, your body today, আমাদের body today is mediated by smartphones, biometric data, face recognition, health apps, right? Political risk হচ্ছে state can track bodies, not just ideas. Protests can be monitored, bodies become data points. Your physical existence becomes politically readable. Haraway would say that cyborg body is no longer private, it is governable. Reproductive technology, IVF, surrogacy, hormonal birth control, abortion related medical tech. Women's bodies become sites of law, religion, state control. Technology both empowers and regulates reproduction, of course.